So it's 1:15, I think we should get started. I'd like to welcome everybody to my talk in the cross-desktop track of FOSDEM, cross-distribution track, of course. I'm talking today about Univention Corporate Server, which is a commercial distribution based on Debian stable. My name is Moritz Mühlenhoff. I'm a long-term Debian developer myself, and I'm working for Univention since about 6 or 7 years. This is what I'll be talking about today. First, I'll give a brief introduction about Univention Corporate Server so that you get a grasp what's it all about and what it differentiates from Debian, which is the base. Then I'll give some comments why we chose Debian as the base for Univention Corporate Server, and in specific why we chose to base on Debian stable instead of snapshots like, for example, Ubuntu does. And I'll also present some tools and technologies we developed which are part of Univention Corporate Server. And in the end, I'll also give a few comments about the integration of Samba 4 since our new release, which was released a month ago, integrates Samba 4 as part of the standard product. Univention Corporate Server is targeted at commercial adoptions. Usually the sweet spot is between 50 to several thousand users. If you're using less than that, then you still have many of the benefits, but it's the key focus is actually more based on mass management and having everything in LDAP. And if you only have 3 or 4 users, then you don't have that much benefit of having everything in LDAP. The current release is UCS 3.0. The initial development of Univention Corporate Server started nearly 10 years ago. At this date, we have approximately 700 installations. The largest installations user-wise is approximately 80,000 users, and the largest installation in terms of servers and systems or mostly locations is approximately 700. It's approximately 200 to 300. I'll come to that later. Univention Corporate Server is predominantly used in the German-speaking areas, so Germany, Austria, and the German part of Switzerland. It's not that much due to technical or to limitations in our documentation or in our translation. Everything we develop on our own is available in English, and all the interface language, the primary interface language is always English, but this is mostly caused because Univention Corporate Server is distributed by a partner network, and most of these partners are, as of these days, mostly in the German-speaking area. Everything we develop is free software. All our code we develop ourselves is covered by the GPL3, the Afero version of the GPL3. And if anyone wants to run the binary version of Univention Corporate Server, they're paying a license fee. This is a model which is very similar to what Red Hat does with Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Some of the key features of UCS, the core feature is actually tight LDAP integration of all services. Everything we store is always kept in LDAP in one central point. So whatever you add into your resources, into your domain resources, for example, users, you only enter it at one point. And if you're, for example, logging in with a user at your Windows clients or authenticate at the mail server, you always use the same credentials. We're integrating file share management with Samba and CIFS shares. We integrate DNS and DHCP services using bind and the ISC DHCP server with LDAP modifications. We manage all our host accounts, Cyrus IMAP folders, mailing lists, and the whole IP network stack. We also integrate Nagios for monitoring and print services using CUPS. This is all glued into the LDAP domain management. I'll come to that later. The central administration is done through a web interface, which we developed on our own, which is called the Univention Management Console. It also allows applying changes to more than, so it's like the policy mechanism you might know from Active Directory. So you're applying a central policy configured at one place, and then you can put it into effect for example, for all users of your domain. Of course, all the data you manage as part of Univention Corporate Server is also manageable through a command line interface. All the management modules are abstracted internally, and you can always use the same functions in scripts or in imports or similar things. We also integrate Samba with the LDAP backend. So if you install UCS, you get more or less Windows integration out of the box, and you can start to join in Windows clients into your domain. And we also manage the passwords internally and map it into all the various authentication domains. So if you have, you can change your password both on a Windows client, but also in Kerberos or through any of the standard Unix command line tools. We also integrate the management of virtual machines. This is called the Univention Virtual Machine Manager. It's also integrated in our web-based Univention Management Console interface. It supports both KVM and XEN by the means of libvirt. So we're not calling any of the internal functions of KVM or XEN, but we go through this abstraction layer of libvirt, which also means that you can use all the command line features of that virt shell offers you. I'll come to the next point in a bit more depth later on. We also have a domain replication service, which is called the listener notifier replication. It covers not only LDAP replication, but also the replication of modifications for services which do not have direct LDAP access. For example, if you're exporting a share via NFS, NFS being an old venerable service from the 70s, does not have that kind of LDAP interface. So we use this listener notifier mechanism to generate the etc exports from all the data which is stored in the LDAP. I'll explain that in a bit more depth later on. UCS is also used as the base for other products which partner companies use to distribute their own services. Yes. We also provide thin client services. This is actually this has been a core feature even from the very first versions of UCS. We do not use LTSP or other solutions in that case. It's a system we've more or less developed on our own for the last years. It allows not only the access to Linux-based terminal services, but of course we also support accessing Windows terminal services using our desktop, and we also support accessing terminal services which are run as part of Citrix XenApp, so which you might know as Citrix Metaframe in the past. And the largest installation of that range we have at that point is approximately 1,500 thin clients. We also provide a variant which is targeted at schools. Schools have different requirements in comparison to a standard business unit. One significant change is the simplified user management, because all these schools use various local tools to manage all their pupil and teacher data. And we provide the interfaces so that the school administration can continue to use all the tools for management, for managing all the facilities and the data, and we only import them whenever a new school year starts. It also provides additional web interfaces targeted at teachers. So for example, they can configure the websites which should be allowed during a class, or they can, for example, provide teaching material to all the students. And one additional feature, which is specific to the school variant, is that we do partial LDAP replication. Since a regular school does not have the security facilities that a standard server room provides, like having an intrusion detection system or an alarm system, so we only replicate the data which is needed for this specific school to the various outlets. We also provide a desktop based on KDE, and we provide a solution called Univention Desktop Virtualization Services, which provides desktop virtualization so that every user has his personalized desktop instance running, which he accesses from a thin client. And this supports Windows XP, Windows 7, and our desktop variant. And the users access their virtualized desktops from thin clients. There's also a series of groupware solutions which integrate into UCS, but this is not something we do ourselves. This is something where other companies integrate into the management facilities of UCS, and this is not something we do on our own. One example for this is, for example, OpenExchange, which provides an appliance version. This is actually based on UCS on the underlying layers. As I said initially before, we're basing on Debian stable. In contrast, for example, to Ubuntu, which do snapshots of Debian unstable, we're always basing on the stable releases. UCS 2.4 was based on Lenny, so Debian 5.0, and UCS 3.0 is based on Debian Squeeze. While we're basing on Debian stable, of course, we still selectively update a few of these components. For example, we usually use a more recent version of Samba. We use a more recent version of Xen, of KVM, and libvirt. But we do this very selectively, and we're always trying to stick to the stable released version of Debian as close as possible. The motivations for using Debian as the basis, for once, the renowned stability and the general quality. One part of that is also the quality which happens to the distribution once a release has happened. This is also a very important aspect. So all the regular points updates which summarize all the important bug fixes which have been made after the distribution has been released, the security support, these are all very important factors to choose Debian as the base. Another reason, of course, is also that it has a very, very large selection of available software. I don't know any concrete numbers for that, but as far as I know, it's the distribution which provides the largest amount of software packages in the archive. And this is, of course, something which is also very attractive to customers if they have some very specific demand. Whatever weird requirements they have, Debian usually provides some kind of packages in the archive for that. Another very important factor is that the development model is truly open. Since every bug which is filed to the Debian bug tracking system is available to anyone, you don't run into any of these restricted bugs you always find in other Bugzilla installations. And you can also follow the whole development process by subscribing to mailing lists. So this is a very transparent and very open and, for that case, very reliable development process to base on. Another important reason, of course, is that there's no commercial background which is in competition to our own commercial background. If we were basing on, for example, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we would always be sub-controlled by whatever Red Hat product management decides for the next distribution, while in Debian, most of the development is actually more driven by, well, the motivations of the individual developers. It's not that much that there's some kind of restricting commercial or conflicting commercial background. Another important reason is that Debian is more than 18 years old. So we've seen many distributions come and go, while Debian has always been with anyone, and it's thriving and ongoing. So there's no indication that Debian will go away in the next 10 or 15 years. So we would need to select a different distribution to base on. Also, a very important factor which many people don't see is that the rebuildability of Debian is really good. We're rebuilding UCS. We do not use the binary packages from Debian. This is mostly to ensure that there are no problems with any of the libraries we modify on our own, but also because we need full control over the system, and we need to ensure that every package actually builds if we need to make a crucial modification to it. And for example, when we rebuilt Squeeze, we found no more than at most 10 to 15 build failures, and some of them were actually rather temporal. So for example, there was some Perl module which parses financial statistics, and this Perl module had a test suite, and this test suite, for example, downloaded some historic stock values and parsed them. And since that URL was no longer available, the package failed to build from source, but that was actually an issue which was fixed when Debian stable was, so when Debian Squeeze was released, but it was a temporal regression which appeared later on. But other than that, it's truly impressive that you have a system which consists of nearly 15,000 packages, and you can rebuild them almost without any additional effort. There are also, there are not that many challenges. Actually, there are, I really had to look hard to find some. One problem is that Debian stable is a very problematic base for any desktop targeted solutions. For our version of UCS, which is targeted at desktop users, we always have the ongoing problem that we need to support new graphic chipsets. This is actually the largest problem, because people come and have their very new NVIDIA drivers or whatever they bought for their new systems, and since all the components of the Xorg graphics stack are tightly interwoven with each other, it's really difficult to provide backports, because you always end up not only updating the X driver himself, but also the X server, and then you need to update the kernel because you need new functions in the kernel modules which are required for DRM. The solutions for that, this is of course not a Debian problem, so I don't want to blame, this is not a Debian specific problem, it's just a problem we are having with basing on Debian stable, and as a solution for that, the upcoming versions of our desktop product will be based on snapshots from Debian testing. One problem which we've seen over the time several times is that Debian sees the OpenSSL license as incompatible with the GPL. So any code which does not have an exception to link with GPL software is seen as incompatible. This is something which several other distributions see differently. It's a rather complicated legal issue, but for example, Red Hat, which has probably more lawyers than there are Debian developers, they've chosen to just treat OpenSSL as a system library, and for that you have different rules applies with the OpenSSL library, and I think that's something that what Debian would benefit as well from, because there are both functionality which is disabled in Debian for that reason. For example, the Squid packages do not have TLS support, and there's also the problem that most of the regression testing, most of the production use of OpenLDAP, which is of course a very crucial service, is done with OpenSSL instead of GNU TLS. And there's also the recommendation of the OpenLDAP developers to use OpenSSL rather than GNU TLS. So this is one thing that would be very nice if they were fixed in the foreseeable future. Now I'll introduce a few technologies and tools we've developed as part of UCS. One tool which is quite old, which has been there since the very first releases of UCS, is Univention Configuration Registry. It's a solution which simplifies configuration management. In UCS, the typical way to configure services or local system properties is not by editing a config file, but by setting the value in a Univention Configuration Registry variable. And then we provide templates for the typical configuration files, so that, for example, if you set the host name in the UCR variable host name, then all the various configuration files which source the host name are automatically being rewritten, and you can change it from one unique interface. This interface is both a command line interface and a web-based interface. This has a couple of advantages. At one point, you have a coherent interface, since all the open source applications which are present do not have a single common upstream, but have various different routes all over the place. So the configuration formats vary over the various projects. So the only interface the typical administrator sees when using Univention Corporate Server is only the variables, and we as the integration provider care about the specific configuration format, but the end administrator only needs to set these variables. This also allows central configuration of very many services. For example, we just set LDAP policies with specific variables, and then we can update a couple hundred systems. Well, and of course, it also has the nice interface, the nice benefit that it decouples the configuration setting from the actual configuration file. So if you need to update to a new version of a software which has incompatible configuration file formats, you don't need to have some transition tools which convert it to the new format, but we only provide the configuration file template in the new format, and then we source the already existing variables, and then we can simply continue. It's manageable both through a command line interface and a web interface, and for 99% of all usage scenarios, we cover all the crucial configuration possibilities through existing variables. And if you still need to make changes to which are not covered by existing variables, then you can still edit the configuration file template to make your own local changes to it. Another UCS-specific technology is the listener notifier replication. We use this both for the LDAP replication, but also to replicate domain-wide changes for services which are not covered which do not have direct LDAP access. In the structure of a UCS domain, there's one authoritative LDAP server, which is called the master domain controller, which has the only writable LDAP master copy. So all changes are made to the master domain controller, and all the other LDAP servers are effectively read-only, so they provide all the LDAP data as a local service, but all the writable changes are directly redirected to the master domain controller. And then we have, I think I'll cover that as next slide. In the next slide, the replication is the LDAP replication itself is also covered by this listener notifier replication. This also covers the replication of LDAP schema changes. So if you need to, for example, to extend one of the LDAP schemata, then you only need to update the version on the master domain controller, and all the changes get replicated automatically to all the other LDAP servers in your domain. With this interface, we also distribute non-LDAP changes. I already gave the example of amending the etc exports file for an FS. We use this interface to make domain-wide changes for all services which are not covered by LDAP. Another important example, for example, is CUPS, which does not have an interface to read its printer definitions from the LDAP. It can only read it from the etc CUPS printers conf. So we're managing these CUPS printers conf directly through these modules. The system works that way that there's a system service called the Univention directory Notifier, which is running on the master domain controller. It monitors the authoritative LDAP through a transaction log file and replicates all the changes it has detected to all the various Univention directory Notifier instances. The Notifier instances are system services which are running on all the other systems of the UCS domain. And whenever any changes are transferred to any of the other systems, then all the local Univention directory manager modules put the changes into local effect which they have received. This system scales pretty well. Our largest installations as of today is around about 200 servers, which are being distributed for all the various systems of the domain, and there's work ongoing to have another installations updated to an area of 700 to 800 systems. And multi-master replications is also planned at a later point, so that there's not only one place where changes are made to the LDAP directory, but so that it's also possible to make changes at several places at once. And the system also allows selective replication. I already gave the example of the UCS at school variant, but for example, you can also use the system to only replicate parts of your domain data to specific servers. Another technology I'd like to talk about, because it's not that common to have it included in a support setup so far, is our integration of Samba 4. Samba 4 is available in UCS since more or less a month with the release of UCS 3.0. The key features of Samba 4, in addition to the already existing Samba 3, is the key changes that it supports Active Directory services. This is the domain technology which is available on Windows servers since Windows 2000, so effectively since more than a decade. One specific feature which is quite useful for desktop deployments of Windows clients is that it provides group policies which allow you to configure the behavior and the design and the restrictions of a Windows desktop through policies which are put into effect if a user logs in to one of the systems which are joined to this Active Directory domain. One important factor which Samba 4 provides, with the key feature that it provides Active Directory, is also that it provides compatibility to services requiring Active Directory. For example, if you as an administrator are in the position of needing to implement Microsoft Exchange, then Microsoft Exchange needs an Active Directory for authentication. So if you have a domain which is currently based on entirely Linux-based systems, and you're providing, for example, Windows client support using Samba 3, and your boss requires you to introduce Exchange into the near future, then you would need to install an additional Microsoft Active Directory based on Windows Server, while Samba 4 provides you with the necessary means and compatibility features to even run such services which require Active Directory in a purely Linux-based domain. Also, one important key change is that the primary authentication in Active Directory is based on Kerberos instead of the old NTLM hashes, which are insecure and which have many problems and issues on their own. One important point to consider is that there still hasn't been a final release of Samba 4. We have done the integration of Samba 4 in cooperation with the company Xeonet, which is specializing in Samba support and which also hires or employs many of the core Samba developers. The integration of Samba 4 still misses a few features which are provided by native Active Directory. I'll come to that later on. But some of the features which are missing in a plain native Samba 4 installation are also mitigated by some of the features we provide in UCS, like for example the listener notifier domain replication. The existing limitations of Samba 4 at that point is that you cannot join Windows domain controllers into your domain, so you can join as many Windows clients as you wish, but it's not possible to join a Windows domain controller. The reason for that is that there's a share which is called the sysvol share. It's a share which needs to be available on all domain controllers of an Active Directory domain. This sysvol share stores data like the netlog on policies or the netlog on scripts and the group policies. And this replication of this sysvol service is not yet implemented in Samba 4. For all the servers which are based on UCS, we've developed our own replication of this sysvol share, but it's not possible to replicate this data to a Windows-based server. Also, Samba 4 does not support forest domains at this point, but this is actually a feature which usually only applies to very old or rather big Active Directory installations. It's not an issue you will run into if you provide Samba 4 at a typical enterprise, if I phrase it like that. Also, another feature which is not implemented in Samba 4 at that point is trust relationships. Trust relationships are a feature of Windows which allow you where two domains declare that they trust each other. So if a user is authenticated on domain R, he can directly use all the resources of domain B without a need for an additional re-authentication. Another issue which is coming with Samba 4 is that Active Directory itself is based on LDAP itself. It implements its own LDAP directory service. So we have two competing LDAP services. On the one hand, we have the OpenLDAP service, which is part of UCS. And on the one hand, we have the LDAP service, which is implemented by Samba 4. This also brings the additional issue that all the Windows clients expect the Samba 4 service or the Active Directory LDAP service to be running on the standard LDAP ports. So it's 389 for the unencrypted LDAP and 636 for the TLR secured variant of LDAP. And you cannot really change that because all the Windows clients do not have the means to configure the port they access, and they require that port when they're trying to join the domain. For that, we've changed our OpenLDAP server to run on distinct ports than the standard ports. So basically, it's the standard number with an additional 7,000 added to it, and we've modified all the services of Univention Corporate Server to directly use these different ports. And we've developed a synchronization service between the LDAP service in Samba 4 and the LDAP service of the standard UCS based on OpenLDAP, which is called the Univention S4 connector. It does bidirectional synchronization of the two LDAP services. So if you're running UCS with Samba 4, you can create a user both in the Active Directory user management and also in the Univention management console as part of the OpenLDAP data. The integration of file and print services is also something which needs to be considered when implementing or integrating Samba 4. With UCS, you have two possibilities. You can either use a server which does not have, which is called a member server in the Windows terminology, which is a server which does not provide domain controller functionality. And for these member servers, we still use Samba 3 because they don't need or require or implement any of the services which require Active Directory. So we just use the standard, very robust and very feature-proven Samba 3 release. And there's also, if you want to provide file and print services based on Samba 4, then there's the additional setup that there's the SMBD service, the SMBD process from Samba 3 is running in addition to the Samba 4 daemons, and it's been configured so that authentication is directly passed through. The reason for that is that Samba 4 started to implement the file services in a new implementation, but at some point they decided to stop with this effort, and now it's only available for debugging purposes. And this kind of setup, which is outlined in the second point, is actually something which will probably be the default way of provide file and print services when there's a final release of Samba 4. Another issue which arises if you use Samba 4 is that Active Directory is tightly coupled with DNS. You definitely need DNS services in your domain to deploy Active Directory. For that reason, we've updated our bind to version 9.8. Since this version provides support for dynamic loadable zones, which are a feature where Samba, so in that case, we've modified bind so that all the DNS data is stored in Samba 4, and bind only uses Samba 4 as the backend to deliver all the DNS requests which are being sent to the server. Another feature which is offered by Samba 4 is that it supports group policies. All these group policies are edited with the standard Windows tools. So you use the administrator would use the standard group policy editor, and the license of this editor is just bound to the Windows client license, which you would need anyway if you provide Windows client services. You do not need a license of Windows Server to run or execute or use any of these group policy management tools. Okay, here I've collected a few sources of additional information and the list of our Bugzilla. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. We're supposed to use a mic, I think, so I'll just hand this to you. I'm not sure where to turn it on, but possibly.
Okay. I would like to know a bit more about the synchronization between the Samba 4 OpenLDAP and the standard OpenLDAP synchronization. I mean, is that a periodical process that checks every time and if there are new users? Or?
Yes. This Samba S4 connector is actually based on a tool which we are already, which I haven't mentioned in the slides, but which we provide as part of UCS for several years, which is called the Univention Active Directory Connector. This was a solution where you could synchronize an Active Directory to an OpenLDAP. It works that way that there's a configure interval. In the standard, I think it's 3 or 4 seconds. So every 3 or 4 seconds, it queries the other directory service, and it does the matching of the last changes with these USNs, the unique serial numbers, which are increased whenever there's a change in either the OpenLDAP directory service or the Active Directory service.
Okay, thank you. What about the passwords? I mean, if in a Windows client, the user changes password,
Yes.
does Samba receive the password in clear, in plain text, so you can hash it in different formats? If you have different services in your server, you need to have the password hashes in different formats, like MD5, SH1.
Yes. If you use the old solution, so the Univention Active Directory connector, which mapped an Active Directory and the OpenLDAP service, then at that point you needed to install a password service, which we provide, which is called the UCS password service, which you need to install on the Active Directory server. But in this setup, this is no longer needed because the primary authentication means is the Kerberos key, and for that we don't need an additional synchronization. Internally, we map all the various password types internally. So if you're changing your password in Kerberos, for example, it directly gets mapped to the respective Windows passphrase.
Was that all system using the complexity requirements checks with a hook in the Windows server to check if the password meets the complexity and the
Yes, you can configure the password complexity as part of the user management tool.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I think he was a bit earlier, so we'll come to you.
So, I'm too interested in the connector.
Yes.
The connector. Can it run independently of the whole stack of Univention, like as a separate software? If you have an OpenLDAP and you have an Active Directory?
Yes, it's somehow coupled to other Univention tools, but you could hack around that, I think. For once, it configures its own configuration data with this Univention configuration registry mechanism I mentioned earlier, but it should be possible to work around that and just use the local configuration file. And you would also need, because the changes made to the local OpenLDAP server are transferred using the Univention directory listener module. So this is also part of the. But if you want to try it on a non-UCS systems, it should be doable. It's written in Python primarily, and you can fetch the source from
GPL, right?
Yes, it's GPL.
Thanks.
Could you pass in the
How do you handle security updates? UCS 2.4 is supported until the end of 2013, I think, and by that
Yes.
time Debian Lenny will already be out of support, and
yes,
and even think of packages like PHP. You're shipping 5.2 point something 6 that Debian is shipping. It's even out of support by PHP upstream.
Yes, but we're following the Debian policy of extracting and backporting security fixes with that, and when the support for Lenny ends, we'll effectively roll our own security updates. We have the necessary knowledge in-house. It's standing in front of you. Since I'm already part of the Debian security team, I know the internal procedures and details, so this is not an issue with us. So if there are no further questions, I think we've managed the time pretty nicely, and there's only 1 minute left. So thanks everyone for visiting, and if you want to try it out, just follow any of these. I think the slides will be, I think I sent them to FOSDEM, or I should send them, I'm not sure, but I think they'll be available on the website soon. So thanks.